Welcome to the Jaren Jarvis channel. Today, I would like to introduce you to the story, Perchance to Dream. Author, Theatrical. Read by, Jaren Jarvis. Prologue. 1996. Emmeline stood on the lawn of the house next door to her own, staring up at the second-story window. The blonde boy who stared down at her from the other side of the glass smiled. It didn't seem to be a menacing one, Moria Euro broken bar genuine. Warm. Gentle, even. The 2-year-old held her small hand up to wave at him, and he waved back, the smile never leaving his features. She fixed her eyes on the front door, and started moving her tiny feet forward. When she got to the stairs, she paused for a moment. She hadn't quite mastered the stairs yet. Mama always carried her up and down them so she wouldn't hurt herself. Placing her hands down on the bricks, she picked one foot up and put it on the step. Before she could pull herself up, she felt hands on her waist, and she was being lifted off the ground. "Emmeline, what have I told you about wandering off? You nearly gave Mama a heart attack." Constance Langdon put the toddler on her hip, glanced up at the window once, locking eyes with her son. Tate grimaced at his mother, and she turned on her heels, walking back toward her own house. "Sorry, Mama." Emmeline apologized, burying her head in the crook of her mother's neck. She looked back at the boy in the window, and was filled with sadness. She wasn't sure why she wanted to go in that house and see him. Mama always taught her never to talk to strangers. But something with him felt different. He was a mystery, and the curious 2-year-old longed to solve it. Chapter 1. 2000. Don't stray too far, Emmeline. Stay where I can see you. Emmeline looked back toward her mother, who was sitting on a park bench, wearing sunglasses and reading the latest issue of Glamour. Her older sister, Adelaide, sat next to their mother on the bench, scribbling in a sketchbook. "Emmeline, did you hear me?" "Yes, Mama," the 6-year-old called back, rolling her eyes. She never understood why her mama was so protective over her. She wasn't that way with Adelaide. She continued her venture toward the swing set. There was only one swing left open, and she was determined for it to be hers. It was a particularly busy day at the park, the air was cool, and there was a soft breeze blowing. Her walk turned into a run, as she saw another child headed for the same swing. She had almost reached it, when she felt 2 small hands on her back, shoving her to the ground. "Hey!" Emmeline shouted, pushing herself up off the ground and dusting herself off. She fought back tears as she felt something warm and wet dripping down her forehead. The little boy stuck his tongue out at her, taking his place on the swing and kicking his feet. An overwhelming sense of rage filled Emmeline, and she narrowed her eyes, keeping them locked on the boy. His feet kicked back and forth, creating momentum to keep the swing moving. "Too bad, slowpoke. Better luck next time," he taunted. Emmeline had never felt so angry in her life. She hadn't even gotten that angry at Addie when she'd broken Emmeline's piggy bank and took all the money from it. All she could think about was him falling off the swing. She could see it clearly in her mind, and she wished for nothing more than for it to happen. She turned around and started walking back toward her mother to tell her what happened, when she heard a shrill scream from behind her. She quickly turned around, and saw the boy who'd just thrown her on the ground laying face down in the rocks. Eyes widening, Emmeline turned back and sprinted toward her mother. "Mama!" Her frantic voice called. "Mama, can we go home, please?" "What's the matter, sweetheart? What happened to your forehead?" Constance asked, taking her sunglasses off and giving her daughter a concerned look. "I'm not ready to go," Addie retorted, keeping her eyes on the sketchbook. "Mama, please." Tears started falling from Emmeline's eyes. "Mama, please, I want to go home." "All right, darling." Constance stood from the bench, taking the sketchbook from Addie's hand and shoving it into her bag. "Come on, Addie." "Emmeline, sweetheart, we'll get that scrape cleaned up when we get home, all right?" She took Emmeline's hand in her own and started walking down the sidewalk, an upset Adelaide trailing behind. Emmeline glanced back toward the swing set, where the boy's father was picking him up from the ground and rushing toward their car. Later that afternoon, Emmeline sat on nook by her bedroom window, staring outside. She could scarcely see her reflection in the glass. She truly was the spitting image of her mother. Blonde hair, piercing blue eyes. She thought back to the year before, when a boy in her preschool class brought his father, who was a police officer, to show and tell. She went home that afternoon and went straight to Constance, inquiring about her daddy, and why he wasn't around. Constance explained that Emmeline had no father, that she was such a special girl, she didn't need one. She heard a light knock on her bedroom door. "Emmeline? Sweetheart? Can I come in?" Constance spoke softly, peeking her head in the door. "Sure, Mama." She pulled her legs closer to herself, making room for her mother on the nook. Constance walked over and sat next to her daughter. Emmeline kept her eyes down. Since they'd left the park, she felt horribly guilty. She knew she'd made the kid fall off the swing, she just didn't know how. She'd only thought about €1, she hadn't even laid a hand on him. "You know," Constance began. "Ever since you were big enough to be in your own bedroom, I'd come in here and this is where I'd find you. Most times you'd fall asleep, looking at your window at the stars." She smiled gently, putting a soft hand on her daughter's face. "Are you all right, darling? You've been awfully quiet since we left the park." "Yes," Emmeline lied, still not meeting her mother's gaze. Tears started burning the brim of Emmeline's eyes, and she rested her forehead against her knees. "Emmeline," Constance spoke, but the younger girl didn't respond. "Sweetheart, look at me." She did as she was told. She always did. She'd seen how her mother acted with Adelaide when she didn't listen. "You know you're Mama's special little girl, don't you?" "Yes, Mama," Emmeline responded, as Constance wiped the tears from her daughter's face. "And you know Mama loves you more than anything in the world, right?" she asked, and Emmeline nodded. "You can tell me anything, darling." Emmeline paused, not knowing how to word what she wanted to say. "I didn't trip and hurt my forehead. A little boy pushed me." She could see the rage that crossed her mother's face as soon as the words left her mouth. "He got on the swing I wanted to go on, and all I could think about was how bad I wanted him to fall off. And when I was walking away to find you, it happened. He fell off and he really hurt himself. And I think it was my fault, Mama." She started crying even harder, and Constance's angry look flashed to panic, only for a second. Not long enough for Emmeline to notice. She gathered her daughter in her arms and pulled her into her lap, pulling her close. There, my sweet girl. It's just a coincidence. You couldn't have known it was going to happen." Constance kissed the top of Emmeline's head and started rocking back and forth gently. "My special girl," she cooed. "Mama's perfect, beautiful girl." Emmeline suddenly felt so at peace, so comfortable in her mother's embrace. She always knew how to calm her, to make her forget everything that was worrying her. They both wanted to be able to enjoy it longer, but within seconds, Emmeline was fast asleep. Chapter 2. 2011. Emmeline sat in the very spot she'd sat years before, staring out the window. Instead of starting at the sky, as she normally did, she was staring at the house next door. The house that she'd been so fascinated with since she was a child. She'd attempted many times to try to go there, to visit the strange boy who lived there, but no such luck. Either Constance would catch her before she was out the front door, or Adelaide would tell on her. Emmeline knew she wasn't like most people her age. Her mother always told her she had an old soul. She'd prefer spending her weekends in her bedroom or in the backyard reading, rather than sniffing coke and going to raves like the other kids in her grade. She'd never even been to a school dance, but that was more her mother's choice than her own. She felt as if her entire life was a huge mystery. She didn't know much about her family history, aside from the ones who lived in the house. Emmeline knew she had an older brother, Beau, but he died before she was born. She had another brother who died when she was 1, but she couldn't even remember what either of them looked like. Her kept all the pictures packed up from when they moved into the house. She still didn't know anything about her father, and Constance was still as stubborn with giving her any information about him as she'd always been. That was one of the most frustrating things to Emilinia, all the secrets kept from her. Even Addie wouldn't spill any information about her father or her brothers, and she did not mind gossiping any chance she got. There was a moving truck out front of the house, and the new family looked interesting. They looked like a stereotypical cookie-cutter type of family. A mom, a dad, a dog, and a girl. Emmeline couldn't understand the feelings that bubbled up in her stomach when she saw the girl. She looked to be around the same age she was, maybe a little older. She stood out of the way with her arms crossed as the movers did their job. Her long, sandy brown hair hung past her shoulders, and she wore layers of clothes despite it being the middle of April. Emmeline bit her lip and rose from the nook, exiting her bedroom and heading toward Addie's room. She poked her head in and saw her sister passed out on her bed, soft snores coming from her mouth. Her mother had left minutes before, to go get groceries and cigarettes, so she'd be gone for an hour or two. Emmeline knew this was her chance. The only time she was ever out of the house without Constance or Adelaide was when she was at school. There were times where her mother would randomly vanish, only to return an hour or so later, but she left Adelaide standing guard to make sure Emmeline didn't leave the house. Her mother was constantly smothering her, always telling Emmeline she was her sweet, perfect girl. She ran quietly down the staircase, and into the kitchen. She couldn't just show up there empty-handed, so she opened the fridge to see what they had that would pass as a welcome to the neighborhood. She settled for the casserole Constance had made the night before. She took the tin foil off and stuck the glass pan in the microwave until it was warm, and spread it out to look as if it hadn't been eaten out of. She put a fresh piece of foil and quickly walked out the front door, closing it quietly behind her. She wished she'd looked in a mirror before leaving the house, but she shook the thought from her head as she walked down the sidewalk toward the house. She was suddenly overwhelmed with a strange feeling that she couldn't explain. The family had already gone inside, and the door was wide open, so she knocked on the frame before letting herself in. "Hello?" Emmeline called, looking around. She could see the movers walking back and forth, putting boxes in different rooms, all at the direction of the older woman, who she assumed was the mother of the younger girl. "Hey!" The girl who Emmeline had been staring at turned the corner, eyeing her speculatively. Hi. I'm Emmeline, I live next door." She smiled, trying to play it cool, but there were butterflies erupting in the pit of her stomach. "I brought this for you guys, as like our Euro broken bar welcome to the neighborhood thing, I guess." Emmeline handed the dish over, and the girl motioned for her to follow her into the kitchen. Emmeline followed her, feeling like a lost puppy trailing after its mother. "Violet," she introduced herself, putting the dish on top of the stove, and turning to face the girl, leaning on the countertop. "This sucks," she mumbled under her breath. "What does?" Emmeline asked, resting her hands on the cool countertop. "Moving. Uprooting my entire life because my dad's a jackass." Oh, Emmeline wasn't sure what to say, or why she found herself so tongue-tied around a person she'd just met. The two seemed to be almost polar opposites. Violet had a darker vibe, the layered clothes, the don't care attitude, and Emmeline noticed the marks on her wrists from fresh cuts, along with older scars. Violet must have noticed her looking, because she pulled her sleeves down to cover them. "Sorry," she apologized. Emmeline was more light-colored clothing, light blonde hair, and more of a please-everyone attitude. "It's cool." Violet opened her mouth to say something else, when they were interrupted. "You're going to die in here," Emmeline cringed, turning around to face her sister, who'd apparently entered the house moments earlier. Violet's mom entered the kitchen, donning a confused look. "Who are you? And what are you doing in my house?" she asked. "Sorry," Emmeline apologized, walking over to her sister. "I'm Emmeline, and this is my sister Adelaide." "Mom's going to be so mad at you," Addie whispered to Emmeline, snickering deviously. "We'll get out of your way," Emmeline apologized and headed toward the door. "Wait," Violet called. "Mom, can I go next door and hang with Emmeline for a bit?" "Don't be long," her mother replied. You have to unpack your room. The butterflies in her stomach started feeling like a flock of pigeons. She turned her head to face Violet, who had a small smile on her face. You don't mind, do you? She asked. No, of course not. Emmeline answered. Let's go, Adelaide. Addie was staring at Violet's mother, who obviously looked extremely uncomfortable. I'm coming. Addie turned around and walked out the front door, and Emmeline and Violet followed behind. I needed to get out of there, Violet admitted. My mom's been driving me nuts since this morning. Glad I could help, Emmeline laughed quietly, as they walked up the front steps and into their house. Where the hell have you been? Constance was standing a few feet from the front door, and though Emmeline and Adelaide had been gone, she was only starting at Emmeline. When she noticed Violet standing behind Emmeline, her demeanor changed, but only slightly. We just went to meet the family next door, Emmeline said gently, keeping her eyes on the floor. Constance took a breath, before putting on the fakest smile Emmeline had ever seen on her mother's face. Well, leave a note next time. Okay, darling? Addie, dear, why don't you into the living room and watch Dora the Explorer so Emmeline and I can talk? Can we do that later, Mama? Violet wants to stay and hang out for a little while. She pleaded, giving her mother the best pouty look she could muster. It's all right. Violet awkwardly started backing out the front door. Panic sprung up in Emmeline's chest when she realized the horrible first impression Violet was getting of her mother. I'd probably better go anyway, my mom will kill me if I don't get my room unpacked. But I can come back soon, if you want. Emmeline thought she saw a glimmer of hope in Violet's eye, and she nodded a euro almost a little too enthusiastically. See you later, EMS. Come back any time. Constance's fake voice nearly made Emmeline vomit in her mouth. Violet walked out the door, closing it behind her. Emmeline turned to face her mother, whose eyes were nearly glowing with rage. Mama, she started. I'm sorry. Constance glowered at her child and turned around, walking into the kitchen. Emmeline sighed, following behind her. She really didn't want to fight with her mother. Constance sat down at the table, opening one of her packs of cigarettes and lighting one, taking a long drag. Emmeline sat at the table in the chair next to her, keeping her eyes down. I'm sorry, Mama. Emmeline stated again, putting her hand on Constance's. Her mother looked her in the eyes, and it was a look she wasn't familiar with. She wasn't usually the type to go against her mother's word, and staying away from that house was her mother's main rule. I just saw them moving in and I wanted to go say hello. That's all. Constance continued silently smoking her cigarette, and the guilt Emmeline felt was almost eating her alive. She sighed and turned around, walking from the kitchen and up the stairs into her bedroom. She knew it'd probably be best to leave her mother alone until she calmed down. Her mother had never been mad at her, but she'd seen how she'd gotten with Addie a few times, and that was something Emmeline preferred to avoid. She closed her bedroom door and sat on her nook yet again, staring out her window. A movement in one of the upstairs windows caught her attention. A familiar face stared back at her, and Emmeline's eyes widened. The blonde boy smiled softly, waving at her from the other side of the glass. Chapter 3. You've seriously never listened to the Strokes? Violet looked over at Emmeline, who was sitting on the edge of her bed, shrugging innocently. Mama never really let us listen to heavy metal music, she admitted, giving the other girl a sheepish smile. Emmeline finally convinced her mama to let her visit the Harmons' house after they'd been living there a few weeks, and Constance had a chance to introduce herself to them. Her only condition is that she stay out of the basement, which Emmeline thought was strange but brushed it off. She was just happy to be able to spend time with Violet. Your mom seems a Euro broken bar nice. Violet put a record on her old vinyl record player and turned the volume up, then took a seat next to Emmeline on the bed. She is, really. Emmeline swore. She's just a Euro broken bar, a little protective. I've noticed. Violet laughed softly, bumping her shoulder against Emmeline's playfully. Emmeline felt a spark when their arms touched, but she tried to brush it off. From the expression on Violet's face, she hoped she'd felt it too. So what kind of music do you listen to? She probably listens to Mozart or some other uptight shit. A voice from the doorway spoke. Emmeline and Violet both jumped, startled by the unexpected sound. Emmeline's eyes widened when she realized who it was. It was the blonde boy. The one she'd seen in the window the day Violet's family moved into the house. The one she'd seen as a child. She knew it couldn't have been the same persona, maybe his kid, or his brother? She didn't really evaluate for long, as he spoke again. "That's Tate," Violet informed her. "He lives down the street or some shit. My dad's his shrink, and he likes to pop up for unexpected visits." "Don't act like you don't like it," Tate smirked, taking a seat on the floor in front of them. "You can sit on the bed, you know," Violet told him. "Nah, wouldn't want to give your old man another reason to try to get me to stay away from you." He winked at Violet, and Emmeline felt her heart sink. She could tell from the look in her eyes Violet liked Tate. And he liked her, too. Well, I'd better get home." Emmeline suddenly felt awkward. "Don't go," Tate furrowed his eyebrows. "I don't want to run you off." Emmeline could feel Violet's eyes on her, and could tell she was wondering why Emmeline was trying to leave. "Yeah, stay. Your mom isn't expecting you home until later," Violet said, putting her hand on Emmeline's leg. Emmeline looked over at Violet, who had a small smile on her face. "Fine," she smiled slightly, sitting back down on the bed. "Tate, were you here the day they moved into the house?" Emmeline asked. "No, broken bar." He furrowed his eyebrows in confusion. "Why? I could have sworn I saw you at broken bar in the window. You look so familiar. Why were you looking in their window?" Tate raised an eyebrows, and though Emmeline knew he was teasing her, her face still flushed and turned a bright red. "I live next door, and I sit on my windowsill a lot and just look outside. Something caught my eye, I could have sworn it was you. Easy, I'm just teasing." Tate laughed, reaching over and grabbing a book from Violet's bedside table, flipping through the pages. "Oh," she responded. "Do you go to the same school as Violet?" Tate asked, not taking his eyes off the book. "No," Emmeline sighed. "I go to Sister Mary Margaret's a few blocks over." "A Catholic school?" Tate raised his eyebrow again, looking up from the pages. "Em's mom is a little broken bar neurotic," Violet answered for Emmeline, which made her blush again. Over the last 2 weeks the two had really gotten to know each other. They hung out every day after school, whether it was there or at her own house. She won't let her go to Westfield because of some wicked shooting they had there, like, 10 years ago. "Let me get this straight." Tate stood from the floor. "Your mom won't let you go to a public school because of a shooting 10 years ago, but will let you go to Sister Mary Margaret's where all the students are either on drugs, about to be on drugs, or have parents who are on drugs." "Seems to be the case," Emmeline responded. "Well, your mom sounds like a nutcase," Tate said. Emmeline suddenly felt defensive of her mother. "She's not that bad," she retorted. "If you say so," Tate absent-mindedly responded, pacing around the room. Emmeline caught a glance shared between Tate and Violet, which brought up the same feeling she had earlier. Was she feeling broken bar jealous? There was no way that could be. "Emmeline." She heard a voice call from downstairs. "Darling, I forgot I have a hair appointment in a few minutes." "What does that have to do with you?" Tate asked. "Her mom won't let her stay here if she isn't home." Violet replied for Emmeline again, and the two shared a quick smile. "Sweetheart, are you up there?" Constance called again, and she heard her mother's heels up the stairs. She appeared in Violet's doorway. "Oh, there you are." Constance turned to look at Tate, and her expression changed suddenly. It was an expression Emmeline couldn't understand. She almost looked angry, but like she was masking it well. "Come on, darling, let's go. Addie's waiting in the car." "All right, Mama." Emmeline stood from the bed, looking at Violet. "My house tomorrow?" Violet nodded. Tate, you can come over too, if you want. She really didn't want to invite him, but she really didn't want to be rude, either. Emmeline looked to her mother, whose eyes widened but she remained silent. Nah, it's okay. I have another appointment with Dr. Harmon tomorrow, anyway. He walked toward the bedroom door. I gotta get going, too. See you, Violet, Emmeline. He looked at Constance. Mom, and swept out the door. I'll call you later, Violet. Emmeline smiled and walked out of Violet's bedroom and down the stairs. She and her mother walked out the front door and got into her mother's car, which was waiting on the street. Constance silently got into the car and started driving down the road. Addie was in the back seat with headphones on, watching a TV show on her tablet. Mama? Emmeline broke the silence. Yes, darling? Constance cracked the car window and lit a cigarette. Why did you make that face when you walked into the room and saw Tate there? I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about. Constance's response sounded dry, and the tone caught Emmeline off guard. You looked angry, she contradicted her mother, who laughed sarcastically. I just didn't like the idea of walking into a teenage girl's bedroom, where my teenage daughter was supposed to be studying, and finding a boy in there with them. Constance exhaled a stream of smoke. You would think since the Harmons were such a perfect family, they wouldn't let their daughter act like a little whore and have that boy in her room. Mama, don't call her that. The need to defend Violet rose suddenly, and she felt the attitude slip into her tone, which surprised Constance, who looked at her daughter with a shocked expression. Excuse me? Violet isn't a whore, Mama. She's my friend. My best friend. And Tate was only there for a few minutes before you barged in. Emmeline crossed her arms over her chest, starting forward out the windshield as she spoke. Tate? Addie spoke up from the back seat. Did you say Tate? Hush, Adelaide. Put your headphones back on. This is a private discussion. Constance snapped, pulling the car into the parking lot of the beauty salon. How does she know Tate? Emmeline asked, furrowing her brow in confusion. Addie left the house about as often as Emmeline did. How had Addie met Tate? But she didn't. She doesn't. You know she has no idea what she's talking about. Constance turned the car off. Yes, she does. Mama, why are you so mean to her? Emmeline wished she could take back the words as soon as she'd said them. The next thing she knew, she felt a sharp pain against her cheek as her mother's hand collided with her face. I don't know what kind of bug crawled up your ass, Emmeline Margaret, but you will not speak to me that way. Not now, not ever. Constance grabbed her purse from the floorboard and opened the car door. Come on, let's go inside. I'm staying out here. Emmeline kept her eyes away from her mother's face, and her hand on her cheek. Sweetheart, Constance's tone changed. You can't stay out here by yourself. I'll be in a minute. Emmeline snapped. Fine. Constance put her hands in the air in frustration. Fine. But if you aren't in the salon in 5 minutes, I'm sending Adelaide out here to get you. Fine. Emmeline kept her response short. And lock the car when you come inside. Constance got out of the car, slamming the door behind her. Addie got out right after, following her mother into the hair salon. The tears started falling as soon as Emmeline was alone. She didn't know what was wrong with her or why she felt the urgency to defend Violet, why for the first time in her life she had a bad attitude toward her mother, or why she felt so angry. She started feeling claustrophobic, like she was suffocating inside the car. She opened the door, and pressed the button to lock the doors before stepping out. She took a few deep breaths, but nothing would calm her anxiety. She started pacing back and forth, but nothing seemed to help. She knew Adelaide would be outside to get her soon if she didn't go inside, but she didn't want her mother to see how upset she was. Even though Constance was the cause of it, Emmeline felt guilty letting her mother see her cry. She started walking, away from the car and the salon. Emmeline walked for a few minutes, down the street she was so familiar with. She'd been there hundreds of times. Constance got her hair done at least twice a month. She knew what she was doing was wrong, and that her mother and sister would worry, but she needed time. She needed space. Constance's constant hovering and overreactions seemed to be taking a stronger toll on her than they had before, she assumed because of the fight they'd gotten in. She really didn't want to be around her for a while, but at the same time, she didn't want to be alone. As she continued walking, she pulled her phone from her pocket and called the only person she wanted to see. "Hello?" Violet answered.
Hey,"
Emmeline spoke, her voice cracking from the tears that were still falling. "EMS? What's wrong?" Violet's voice radiated concern. "I'll explain later, can you come meet me?" "Where?" "The beach. I'm on my way." "I can't believe your mom did that." Violet took a long drag off a cigarette, before passing it over to Emmeline. "Yeah, me either." Emmeline could feel her phone constantly buzzing in her jacket pocket, but she ignored it. "She's never done that before. Not to me, anyway." She took a drag off the cigarette, fighting back the urge to cough and handing it back to Violet as she exhaled. "Does your mom, love you more than Addie?" Violet put the cigarette between her lips. "I don't think it's that she loves me more than Addie," Emmeline contemplated for a minute. "I think I'm just easier to care for than she is." "Is Addie your only sibling?" "I had two brothers, but they died a long time ago." "What were they like?" Violet asked, and Emmeline knew she was trying to get her mind off the situation at hand. "I don't know," she admitted. "Bo died before I was born. The only thing I know about him was he had some kind of genetic mutations or something, and he died in his sleep. My other brother broken bar." She looked at Violet. "This might sound crazy, but I don't even remember his name. I was only one when he died, and Mama never talks about him. She never answers any of my questions about him." "She won't even tell you his name?" Violet passed the cigarette back to Emmeline, raising her eyebrows. "Nope." She took another drag, this one going down easier. "That's some weird shit." Violet went quiet for a minute. "Can I ask you something?" Emmeline threw the cigarette toward the water. "Anything," she said sheepishly. "Why did you suddenly want to leave when Tate showed up earlier?" Emmeline looked away, toward the water. She didn't know how to answer that question without sounding like an idiot. "I don't know," she admitted. "You know Tate and I are just friends, right?" Violet asked, and Emmeline looked back at the girl sitting next to her. "Why would that matter?" Emmeline asked, though deep down she knew why the answer to her own question. Violet didn't say anything else. She put her hand under Emmeline's chin, which caused that same electric spark she felt when their arms touched earlier. Her heart started pounding so hard she was sure Violet could have seen it through her chest. Her face got closer, to the point where she could feel Violet's gentle breaths on her face. "What are you doing?" Emmeline whispered, but instead of answering, Violet gently pressed her lips to Emmeline's, kissing her softly. She knew it wasn't supposed to feel right, but oh boy, it did. Emmeline parted her lips, kissing her back, putting a hand gently on the side of Violet's face. Emmeline didn't know if heaven or hell actually existed, but if there were a such thing as heaven, this was the closest she'd ever gotten to it. Chapter 4. "Is this dream that I'm going to wake up from in the morning?" Emmeline said softly as she and Violet walked down the street, hand in hand. They stayed on the beach for a few hours after the kiss, just talking and getting to know each other more. Violet even admitted to having the same butterflies in her stomach as Emmeline the first time they'd met. "I sure hope not," Violet laughed softly, using her other hand to gently stroke Emmeline's arm. "I just have to face the nightmare that's waiting for me inside my house." Emmeline's chest felt tight as they turned the corner onto their street, where they saw police lights flashing outside of her house. "Shit," she whispered, and she felt her heartbeat start to accelerate. Her palms started to sweat, and Violet gave them a gentle squeeze to reassure her that everything would be all right. Before they reached the house, Emmeline gave Violet a quick kiss goodbye and told her to go into the house. She didn't want Constance knowing who she was with. She knew her mother would never let her see that person again, and it would tear her apart if she was never allowed to see Violet again. She hesitated by the front fence, taking a few deep, shaky breaths before opening it and walking up the sidewalk to her front door. She took another moment to breathe with her hand on the doorknob before turning it and walking into the house. "Emmeline?" Her mother's frantic voice called from the kitchen. Constance walked quickly from the kitchen into the foyer. Before Emmeline could utter even a syllable, Constance's arms were wrapped tightly around her, broken sobs shaking her body as she pulled her daughter close. After what felt like an eternity of being in her arms, Constance held her out at arm's length, tightly squeezing her shoulders. "Where the hell have you been?" The police officers walked from the kitchen and dismissed themselves out the front door. I was a Euro broken bar. Emmeline's voice kept faltering, though she really didn't want to seem weak in front of her mother. "You were with that girl from next door, weren't you? Violet?" Constance's relief quickly turned into fury as she let go of Emmeline's shoulders and stalked back into the kitchen. She grabbed a cigarette from the table, lighting it as Emmeline entered the room. "No, Mama, I wasn't with Violet." Emmeline lied, and she knew she probably didn't sound too convincing. "I just needed some Euro broken bar space." "Space? You had me worried sick for hours, because you needed space?" Constance scoffed, taking another long drag from her cigarette, sitting down at the kitchen table. "Yes, Mama. I'm sorry. I just needed some time to breathe." Emmeline sat down next to her, putting a gentle hand on her mother's arm. "I don't understand why you'd feel that way." Constance shook her head, exhaling smoke into the air. "I have given you everything, everything you've ever needed, wanted, everything. And you repay me but acting like an ingrate and running off." What the hell was going through your head, Emmeline? You've always been so level-headed, and ever since that girl moved in next door, you've acted like a completely different person. "What happened to me, sweet girl?" "Violet has nothing to do with this, Mama. And nothing happened to me, I'm growing up." "What's so bad about that?" Emmeline eyed her mother, not understanding why Constance was making such a big deal about what happened, or why she felt the need to constantly blame Violet. "Why are you so quick to defend her? Her family is awful, and her mother has the worst taste I've ever seen." Constance shook her head, putting her cigarette out and immediately lighting another. "Because she has nothing to do with it. You're so quick to blame other people for a Euro broken bar." Emmeline stopped herself. She could feel herself getting more and more angry, and she knew if she didn't walk away, she'd say something she'd regret. She stood from the table and walked out of the kitchen and up the stairs, Constance trailing closely behind her. "When what, Emmeline?" Constance raised her voice, following her daughter into her bedroom. Emmeline spun around to face her, taking a deep breath before releasing the words that she'd been holding onto for so long. "When it's very obviously your fault. I didn't run off because Violet made me, I ran off because smother me, Mama. You never give me any space, or any room to breathe. I needed to get away from you for a while." Emmeline felt tears burning her eyes, but she fought them off. She wasn't about to look weak in front of Constance when she was finally getting out the words she'd been dying to say her entire life. "I can't even go see my only friend unless you're home. And even then, you just pop up whenever you want to check on me. I'm not a child anymore, Mama. I need to be able to spend time with someone other than you already. So, you're mad at me because you think I smother you?" Constance's voice sounded surprisingly calm, which scared her more than her mother yelling at her. She shook her head in what only Emmeline could guess was disbelief. "I have surrounded my entire life around you, Emmeline. I have given you everything, everything, Emmeline. I get that, Mama. I understand." Emmeline approached her mother, taking her hands and giving her a pleading look. "And I never ask you for anything, so I'm asking for this one thing. Just, please, let go. Give me a little space. I'm begging you." "You know what?" Constance threw her hands up in defeat. "Fine. You can have all the space you want. I won't even bother you anymore." She pulled her hands away and turned to leave the room. This reminded Emmeline why she never had this conversation with her mother. A fear she would give up on her. "Wait, Mama. Please, don't go." Emmeline grabbed her hand and Constance turned around. Emmeline could see the tears in her mother's eyes, and she felt her heart shatter into a million pieces. "Mama, I didn't mean to hurt you. I'm sorry. I don't want you to cut yourself completely from my life. I just want a little more freedom. That's all I'm asking of you." Her tears started to fall, and Emmeline didn't care about looking strong anymore. "I need you, Mama." Constance stayed silent for a few minutes. "Fine," she sighed. "Fine. But if you're going to be next door with that girl Broken Bar, you need to know the truth about that house." Chapter 5. What are you talking about? Emmeline speculated, raising an eyebrow at her mother. Constance arose from the bed. "All in good time, darling. I have a friend of mine who is going to come meet you next week. Until Broken Bar you can spend time there. Just Broken Bar, be careful who you make friends with. That's all I'm saying." Constance leaned over her bed and kissed Emmeline gently on her forehead. "I'll think about what you said tonight, and you do the same. I love you, my sweet girl." "So, did your mom flip her shit when you got home last night?" Violet asked. The two of them were laying in Violet's bed, smoking a cigarette, Stevie Nicks playing on the record player in the background. "That's an understatement," Emmeline laughed half-heartedly, taking a drag off the cigarette before handing it back to Violet. "She was acting weird, though Broken Bar. She said she needed to tell me about the truth of this house, your house. But she said someone's coming to our house next week to tell me about it." "Are you talking about the fact that they call this place the murder house?" "What are you talking about?" Violet sat up, throwing the cigarette out their open window before turning to face Emmeline. "Dude, have you been living under a rock or something? We're a stop on the tour of the most haunted places in LA. I told you, the only way Mom ever let me leave this house is if she was with me or I was going to school. Either way, this house has a fucked up backstory." Violet shook her head. "But let's not talk about that right now, Broken Bar." She bit her lip nervously, looking down at her hands. "Look, about last night Broken Bar. Here we go Broken Bar," Emmeline whispered, looking down at her hands. Violet put a gentle hand under her chin and lifted her face to face hers. "What do you mean, here we go? You regret it, don't you?" "Of course not." Violet looked confused as she put a gentle hand on the side of Emmeline's face. "No, I could never regret it." In fact, Emmeline's heart started beating faster and faster. "I wanted to ask you something Broken Bar." "Anything," Emmeline said, and she knew she sounded way too eager. "Are we Broken Bar? You know Broken Bar. Are we what?" Emmeline asked, though she knew very well what Violet meant. "You know Broken Bar?" Violet looked just as nervous as Emmeline felt. Smiling softly to herself, Emmeline leaned in, kissing Violet gently on the lips. Just like the first time they'd kissed, she felt the sparks fly between them. It was almost as if the entire world had disappeared, and there was nothing left to the world other than the two of them. When they parted, Emmeline put a soft hand on the back of Violet's sandy brown hair. "Yes," she answered the other girl's question. "I think we are. I've, never exactly had a girlfriend before, so I'll apologize in advance if I'm not very good at it." She laughed nervously, intertwining her fingers with Emmeline's. "I could say the same thing," Emmeline responded, laughing softly. "Well, it's about damn time." A voice called from the doorframe and Emmeline jumped, startled, looking at the door. "Violet hasn't stopped talking about you since the day we met." "Tate," Violet looked down, embarrassed, her face flushed a bright red color. Emmeline used her thumb to stroke the top of Violet's hand gently. "I'm just saying." He entered the room laughing, and pulled out Violet's desk chair before sitting down. "I'm happy for you guys. Wish I could find someone," he admitted in a dejected tone. "You will," Emmeline spoke up. "You're great, Tate." "Yeah, but it isn't that easy," Tate laughed, like there was some joke Emmeline wasn't in on. "Do you think your mom would let you spend the night? It's not a school night." Violet looked hopeful, and it was a lot more enthusiastic than Emmeline felt. "I don't know, after what happened yesterday, I'm surprised she even let me out of the house. Boo to Euro broken bar. I think things will get better from here. Why do you think that? Tate asked, fidgeting with a pencil he'd grabbed off Violet's desk. I don't know, a Euro broken bar. I think I might have gotten through to her. Emmeline smiled softly, thinking back to the conversation from the previous night. Though it was harsh and tense at first, things had slowly gotten better toward the end of the night. And that morning before school, her mother hadn't brought up anything from the day before. She even fixed her a bag lunch and kissed her forehead before dropping her off at school. Tate scoffed, and Emmeline gave him a curious look. He shook his head, and Emmeline's curiosity deepened. Do you know something about my mother that I don't? She asked. Tate shrugged his shoulders, and she started feeling a little irritated. Emmeline always felt like people were keeping secrets from her, and it was one of her biggest pet peeves. What, Tate? Tate sighed. Now's not the right time. Why do people keep saying that to me? She looked from Tate to Violet. Do you know something I don't know? Of course, no to Euro broken bar, Violet said, though she sounded unsure. What the fuck is going on? She released Violet's hand and stood up from the bed, throwing her hands in the air in frustration. She looked out the window, up at the full moon. Why does everyone feel the need to keep secrets from me? Look, Violet stood up and approached Emmeline, wrapping her arms around her waist. I don't know much about your mom, but I can tell you what I do know. Violet looked at Tate for approval, who nodded. Just call your mom and ask her if you can stay, all right? Then Tate and I will tell you everything. Emmeline sighed in defeat. Fine, I'll try. But I can't guarantee anything. She pulled her cell phone from her pocket, clicked on her home phone number, and listened as it rang. Hello? Constance answered. Hey, Mama Euro broken bar, I know it's a long shot, but would it be alright if I spent the night over here tonight? Violet has a project due Monday and she needs my help. Well, couldn't you just go back tomorrow and help her? Constance asked, with a hint of annoyance in her voice. Mama, please. I've never slept out before. Emmeline pleaded to her mother. Fine, Constance finally said after a moment of silence. But I want to talk to Dr. Harmon. I'll be over there in a minute. Fine, she said. I love you, darling. Emmeline rolled her eyes, hanging the phone up. She's coming. Talk to your parents, we'll see how that goes. Emmeline and Violet exchanged a quick kiss, and Tate rolled his eyes. I'll be back once your mother leaves. He stood up and walked out of the room, and Emmeline looked curiously at Violet. You'll understand later. She kissed Emmeline's hand, and they heard the front door open. The two of them walked downstairs and into the kitchen, where Vivian was already seated at the counter, and Moira was making a pot of tea. Emmeline and Violet took a seat at the counter, hiding their intertwined fingers under the table so their parents wouldn't see. Emmeline didn't feel like explaining their relationship to her mother yet. She wanted to enjoy sleeping at Violet's house as much as she could, because once Constance found out they were together, she most likely wouldn't let it happen again. Hello, darling. Constance smiled at her daughter, then looked at Violet, giving her a speculative look before turning her attention back to Vivian. So, why the unexpected visit, Constance? Moira spoke as she slid the cup of tea in front of the other woman. It's impolite to show up unannounced. I don't know how you handle her, Mrs. Harmon. I wasn't aware the help could speak to guests any way they please. Constance shot a harsh glare at Moira, and Emmeline furrowed her eyebrows in confusion. Why was her mother treating the Harmons maid that way? Moira, could you please finish dusting in Ben's office? Vivian asked, trying not to look annoyed with Constance's presence. Of course, Mrs. Harmon. My apologies for talking out of turn, and with that, Moira left the kitchen. Where's your husband? Constance asked, and Emmeline could tell she was being nosy rather than curious. That was her mother's most prominent trait. She was as nosy as they came. He had to go out of town to meet up with a client, Vivian answered, then blew on her tea to cool it down. He should be back on Monday. And you'll be home all weekend? Constance asked, and Vivian raised an eyebrow at her. Emmeline could feel her palms sweating. This would be the first time her mother ever let her sleep away from home, and she felt extremely nervous. Violet rubbed her thumb gently against the top of Emmeline's hand and she immediately started to calm down. I plan to, yes. Vivian looked at Constance curiously, then glanced over at Emmeline and Violet. Well, Constance sighed, looking over at Emmeline. My daughter has asked to spend the night here with your daughter. And I just wanted to talk to you about it before I give her an answer. Well, I'm fine with that. Vivian smiled. Emmeline's been very sweet and well-behaved since she and Violet started being friends. You don't understand, though, Mrs. Harmon. Constance let out a nervous chuckle, and Emmeline could tell she was worried. Emmeline has never spent the night away from home before. Mama, Emmeline spoke up. It's right next door from home, and I'll have my phone on me so you can call me anytime you need to check on me. I promise we won't go anywhere, we'll just stay here and paint each other's toenails or something. You know, sleepover stuff. Violet gave Emmeline a strange look, and she shrugged in response. They'll be fine here, Constance. I'll make sure to check up on them. Vivian assured Constance. Constance tapped her fingers on the counter, contemplating. With every passing silent moment, Emmeline felt her heartbeat accelerate. Fine, she looked at Emmeline. Fine, you can spend the night. But keep your phone on you. Emmeline jumped up from the counter in excitement and hugged her mother tightly. Oh, thank you, Mama. Thank you. She knew she probably looked stupid for getting so excited, but it was true when Emmeline said Constance never let her do anything. All right, all right. You're welcome, darling. Constance patted her daughter's arm. Come home really quick and grab your things. I'll be right back. She looked at Violet, who smiled back at her. I'll make you two something to eat. Vivian stood up from the counter and was walking to the fridge when Emmeline exited the house. She walked next door to their own home with her mother, who stayed silent for the walk. Constance followed Emmeline up to her room and stood in the doorway as she excitedly packed her bag. Are you sure you'll be all right, darling? You can always stay home. You and Daddy can bake some cupcakes, just like we used to. Her mother approached her, putting her hands gently on the sides of Emmeline's face. I'll be okay, Mama. I promise. Emmeline wrapped her arms around her mother's waist and pulled her into a tight hug. We can bake cupcakes with Daddy tomorrow night. Constance wrapped her arms around her daughter, holding her close and taking a deep breath. All right, darling. But promise me something. Anything, Mama. Stay out of the basement. Constance held Emmeline out at arm's length, looking in her eyes. When Constance did that, Emmeline felt like her mother could see right into her soul. The basement? Emmeline looked at her curiously. Trust me, darling. And promise me, Constance pleaded, and Emmeline nodded her head. I promise, Mama. XO. All right, it's midnight. Tate spoke. Let's get this shit started. The three of them held candles in their hand, and Emmeline felt like they were in the Stone Ages. They snuck down the stairs, and when Tate opened the basement door, Emmeline hesitated. Wait, she could feel her voice shaking. My mom said not to go down there. She made me promise. Well, your mom isn't here, is she? Tate smirked when he spoke, his face only illuminated by the candle. It'll be all right, Violet assured Emmeline, gently taking her hand. Emmeline's gut was telling her to refuse. To go back upstairs to Violet's room and not care about the strange mysteries surrounding her. Better yet, she was so afraid, she wanted to run home, curl up in bed with her mama and watch Golden Girls like they did when she was a child. She did not want to be going in some creepy dark basement with her girlfriend and a boy she hardly knew. They reached the bottom of the stairs, and her nerves were at their worst. Taking a deep breath to calm herself, she followed Tate and Violet to the middle of the damp room. They all sat in a circle, putting the candles in the middle of them. The longer they sat there in silence, the creepier it got. All right, I think I need to start by telling you the history of this house, Tate gave a menacing grin, and started to delve into the entire history of the house they were currently sitting in. The entire story gave Emmeline goosebumps, though she didn't know whether she believed him. "Do you believe in ghosts?" he asked. Emmeline shook her head no. "Well, a euro broken bar you should." Suddenly a strong, cold gust of wind blew through the basement. The candles blew out, and just as Emmeline went to scream, Tate was suddenly behind her, covering her mouth with his hand. "Tate, stop it!" Violet yelled, and Tate shushed her. "Tell me what you know about your brother," Tate whispered into her ear, moving his hand from her mouth. "They're both dead," tears of horror filled Emmeline's eyes. "What were their names?" he asked. "Bew, a euro broken bar, and I didn't know the other one's name. My mom never told me." "Can you please let me go?" Emmeline yelled, trying to fight her way out of Tate's arms. "Tate, come on, this is going too far." Violet yelled, trying to pull his arm away from Emmeline. "Just tell her, Tate." "Tell me what?" Emmeline screamed. "What the fuck is going on?" The light in the basement suddenly switched on, and at the top of the stairs, Emmeline saw her mother standing in her nightgown and robe, arms crossed over her chest. "Tate, a euro broken bar, let your sister go." Chapter 6. Mama? Emmeline sat on the floor, her mouth agape, still reeling at the words her mother had just said. "What are you talking about? Mommy dearest never told you the truth about you, about our family." Tate glared hatefully at their mother, who was now descending the stairs. "About this house. I was trying to protect her, Tate. Unlike you, who apparently just wanted to scare the shit out of her. Come on, Emmeline. We're going home." Constance grabbed her daughter's arm, hoisting her up off the floor. "No," Emmeline protested, pulling her arm away from Constance. She put her hands on her hair and turned away, trying to make sense of what was happening. "No, I'm not going home. Not until I understand what the fuck is going on." Violet sat on the floor helplessly looking at Emmeline, who felt like she was losing her mind. Nothing was making sense. "Emmeline, let's go home." Now, Constance's voice got more stern, and normally this was a voice Emmeline wouldn't ignore. But instead of listening, Emmeline leaned her head against the wall, refusing to move. Emmeline suddenly decided to take up the role of Carol Brady. "Did we, Constance? The picture-perfect mother?" Tate teased, standing up from the floor to face his mother. "Why haven't you told her about me? Huh? About this house? You know she'd find out eventually." Tate's voice grew louder with every word he spoke. "Shut your mouth, Tate." Constance slapped Tate across the face, and Emmeline turned around. The look she saw in her mother's eyes, the anger, and the worry that hid behind them, was almost enough to make Emmeline hide in the corner. "I was trying to protect your sister." "Oh yeah? Like you protected Bo? Bo died in his sleep. You know that, Tate." Constance yelled, throwing her hands in the air angrily. Violet got off the floor and ran over to Emmeline to comfort her. At that moment, neither of them cared if Constance saw the intimate way Violet was stroking Emmeline's hair. "No." Tate screamed. "No, he didn't. Hera Euro," he pointed a finger at Emmeline. "A Euro dickhead father killed him." "My father? Mama, what's he talking about?" Emmeline pushed out of Violet's arms, approaching her mother. "Christ, Tate." Constance screamed. Emmeline had no idea how Violet's mother wasn't getting woken up by all the noise coming from the basement. "So, she doesn't know about him, either?" Tate raised an eyebrow speculatively. "Who are you trying to protect here, Ma? Emmeline, or yourself?" The room got silent. Violet walked up behind Emmeline, wrapping her arms around her waist. She put a hand on Violet's arm, which was covered in goosebumps. Constance's eyes were on the two of them, and her expression softened. "Emmeline, let's go home." Emmeline looked at Violet, who looked heartbroken. "I'll call you," she whispered to her girlfriend, and walked away. When she approached her mother, Constance wrapped her arm around Emmeline's shoulder and they walked up the stairs, out of the basement, and out the front door. 3 years you were born, Constance started, lighting a cigarette as the two of them sat at the kitchen table. Emmeline grabbed one of Constance's cigarettes, lighting it, not caring whether her mother had anything to say about it. After the night she'd had, she needed it. I met Lawrence Harvey. I lived here, and he lived next door. I lived in that house when the other children were born, but after their father left, I lost it. I was so broken bar desperate broken bar to get back into that house, that I started having an affair with Lawrence. It lasted about 1.5 years, then his wife and children died, and we got to move back in. She took a drag off her cigarette, creating a dramatic pause. I found out I was pregnant with you after about 1 year of living there. I was so excited broken bar but terrified. Beau, she handed Emmeline a picture of Beau, whose face was almost so horribly disfigured that it brought tears to her eyes. Beau died in his sleep. And everything just went downhill from there. When you were 1 year old, your father brought you to work with him. Had you downstairs in the daycare while he worked in his office upstairs. Tate walked into his office, poured gasoline on him, and lit him on fire. Is he dead? Emmeline asked, not fighting the tears anymore. She was so confused, hurt, felt betrayed broken bar she didn't know how to feel. Unfortunately, not. Constance rolled her eyes. He still pops up from time to time. Either way, after that Tate went and shot up his high school, and got himself killed by the SWAT team. That's not possible, Mama. None of this is possible. Emmeline put her head in her hands, letting the sobs escape from deep within her chest. Emmeline, you've always been so open-minded. You need to keep your mind open to survive, dear. Constance laughed, but it didn't reach her eyes. That house broken bar, it's special. If you die in that house, you never truly leave it. So broken bar, let me get this straight. Tate is my brother. And he's dead. That's right, Constance confirmed, putting her cigarette out. Emmeline took a long drag from her own, putting it out in the ashtray. She wasn't sure whether she should believe her. Before this happened, she thought her mother had never lied to her. But, she found out her entire life was based around a lie. The betrayal and resentment she felt toward Constance was a feeling she'd never felt before, and instead of saying anything more about it, she stood up and ran upstairs. She slammed her bedroom door and locked it, and went to her window to sit on the nook. She sat down and looked over at the house next door, and she could see Violet in the window. She picked up her phone, dialing her number. She answered on the first ring. Are you okay? Violet asked, and Emmeline could see her pushing the curtains farther to the side so she could see her better. No, Emmeline had tried to fight back her sobs, but she was so overwhelmed with these feelings that she couldn't. How long have you known, Violet? How long have you been lying to me? I wasn't lying to you, Emmeline. Tate asked me not to say anything to you. He wanted to tell you himself. Her voice sounded sad and desperate. But you knew how I felt. My life was this huge, empty mystery, and you knew the answers all along. How can I ever trust you? Emmeline felt so heartbroken, like everyone around her was lying to her. I'm coming over there, Emmeline. The line went dead. 10 minutes later, Violet was knocking on her bedroom door. Open up. Please. She could hear Constance behind her. Don't bother, dear. You may as well go home. Emmeline stood up from her nook and crossed the room to her bedroom door, unlocking it and grabbing Violet's hand, pulling her in before slamming the door in her mother's face and locking it back. She heard her mother sigh, and heard footsteps, then Constance's bedroom door closed. Please, let me just explain. Violet begged, pulling her over to the bed and sitting her down. She sat next to her, pulling her close. Emmeline leaned her head on Violet's chest. She could hear her heart beating faster and faster with every breath. She could tell she was nervous. Tate made me promise not to say anything. He's been wanting to tell you for a long time, he said, since he saw you standing in the front yard when you were little. The memory came flooding back to her, standing on the front lawn, staring up at the window, seeing Tate staring down, trying to get to him. That all made sense. He was afraid. Of what? Emmeline pulled herself out of Violet's arms. Me? No, Em. He's afraid of your mother. I find that hard to believe. There's a lot you don't know about her. Is that something else you're keeping from me? No, Em. Violet put her hand on the side of Emmeline's face. No, he wouldn't tell me. That's something you'll have to talk to her about. Why should I believe you, Violet? Because you're broken bar, because you're broken bar, I love you. Emmeline's eyes widened, and turned to look into Violet's eyes. What did you say? I said I love you. There's no way, we haven't been together that long. You're broken bar. Though Emmeline was saying that, she knew deep down that she loved Violet too. But it feels like it's been years. You're broken bar. It feels like we've been together for years. It's true, Emmeline. I love you, and I would never do anything to hurt you. Violet's eyes were welling up with tears, and though the night had been so surreal and stressful, Emmeline nodded. I agree. You're broken bar, and you're broken bar. I love you, too. Violet's eyes brightened, and a small smile spread across her features. Really? Yeah. Really. Emmeline smiled brightly, leaning in and kissing her gently. The kiss deepened, and the two laid down on the bed. With her fingers intertwined with Violet's, their lips moving in the same perfect harmony, it felt like that night never happened. All Emmeline felt was pure bliss. Chapter 8, Epilogue. A month passed quickly. Emmeline spent all the time she could with Violet, while balancing time with her family. She got to know her brother a little better, and her mother lightened up a bit once she told Emmeline the truth about her family and her house. It took Emmeline a few days to come to terms with it. The next morning when Violet left, Emmeline didn't leave her bed except to go to the bathroom. And the day after that. And the day after that. She missed school, despite her mother's nagging for her to leave the room. Constance was trying to cover up her worry, but she was failing. This is exactly what I was trying to protect you from, she'd say over and over. Until Emmeline woke up one morning, and went about her normal routine like nothing ever happened. It was finally summer break. Emmeline had so many things planned for she and Violet, and she couldn't have been more excited. She had a planner full of things, water parks, museums, things her mother never let her do before. She'd ran next door to tell Violet all about their plans for the day, when she found her girlfriend sitting at the kitchen counter with her head in her hands. The only thing that could be heard in the silent room was Violet's sniffles. Hey, what's wrong? Emmeline put the planner down on the counter, suddenly overwhelmed with concern. She furrowed her eyebrows and walked around the island, wrapping her arms around Violet's waist. What's going on? We're moving. Just like that, Emmeline felt like her whole world was crashing around her. Her heart sank to the pit of her stomach, and she felt like she'd gotten the wind knocked out of her. Where? Why? You're broken bar. I don't understand. We're moving to New Orleans, just me and my mom. She caught my dad and Hayden in bed together again, and she said she's done this time. Violet turned, wrapping her arms around Emmeline, letting out broken sobs. Emmeline felt tears burning the brim of her eyes, and she felt like she couldn't move. I don't want to leave you. Violet cried, her voice sounding absolutely broken. No, Emmeline shook her head, staying silent for a few minutes, going over different ideas in her head. No, this can't happen. I have a plan. What? Violet pulled away, looking into Emmeline's eyes. The blonde smiled and wiped away her girlfriend's tears before pressing their lips together in a passionate kiss. How opposed are you to running away together?